Hi, I'm Kong Loy. I'm an immigrant from China. I was a vegetable and dairy farmer in Vancouver, Washington from the 1880s to the 1940s. State laws made it illegal for me and other Asian immigrants to own the land that we farmed.
Hi, I'm Henry Kato. I'm a U.S. citizen born in 1914. My family and I were vegetable and berry farmers in Gresham, Oregon, where there was a large Japanese American community. State laws made it illegal for my parents to own the land we farmed.
While the history of farming is a big part of the story of the Northwest, its roots are bitter for Asian American families.
Indeed, for nearly a century, Asian farmers were not allowed to own their land on the West Coast, and these laws affected our families for generations.
The mythology of the white pioneer farmer overlooks hundreds of Asian communities that are an important part of farming history in the Northwest.
In 1920, more than 26,000 Asian and Asian American farmers contributed to the Northwest economy.
Ours were just a few stories of how Asian farmers, like us, grew the food that fed our region. Despite the struggles we faced, a few managed to succeed. Indigenous people have been farming here for thousands of years. They cultivated plants, maintained landscapes, and formed complex relationships with the land to steward what helped them thrive.
Settlers passed laws like the Oregon Donation Land Act of 1850 to take away the land from Native people. Laws like this gave U.S. citizens the ability to own land taken from Native people free of charge. Asian immigrants were almost never granted citizenship, and they rarely owned lands. But not owning land did not stop Asian immigrants from farming. Instead, we farmed as renters and missed out on the security, wealth, and dream of property ownership.
Some of the first Asian farmers in the region, like me, grew vegetables. In the late 1870s, a community of Chinese vegetable farmers developed along the edge of downtown Portland. The steep hills just outside the city were hard to farm, and so no one wanted them. Chinese farmers first grew vegetables on 3 acres, and then quickly expanded to 21 acres, living in extremely small shanties nearby. Over time, many of Portland's richest families built mansions in the hills and purchased their vegetables directly from Chinese vegetable peddlers. Most Portland elites believed in the racial superiority of white folks, but spoke favorably of Chinese farmers because our labor and quality vegetables benefited their lives. In the 1880s, the U.S. became an increasingly hostile place for Chinese immigrants. The 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act, the 1888 Scott Act, and the 1892 Geary Act excluded Chinese immigrants from U.S. citizenship and forbade Chinese immigrants from entering the U.S. By the early 1900s, the growth of the city, regulations, and outright bias toward Chinese people brought an end to the farms. First, a series of city permits and fees restricted our ability to sell produce. Secondly, a series of laws, called the Alien Land Laws, that specifically targeted Chinese and Japanese people, but also impacted Native Americans, South Asians, Koreans, Filipinos, Indians, and many other groups. These laws made it so we could not own our land or get loans for farming equipment and supplies. Sadly, in 1910, the Chinese vegetable growers on the hillside were evicted to construct today's Monoma Athletic Club and Providence Park. We know little of what happened to the individual farmers. I worked with some who found work as laborers on other farms, railroads, or in canneries or mills.
Because of the Chinese Exclusion Act and the need for farm workers, small numbers of Japanese immigrants came to Oregon and Washington in the 1880s to work as farm laborers and in other industries like railroads, mines, canneries, and timber. Like the Chinese farmers, they could not own property under U.S. laws. Japanese immigrants like my parents and grandparents were so successful at farming that by the turn of the century, over 3/4 of the 3,873 Japanese in Oregon were working as farmers. In Portland's Montevilla neighborhood, 36 Japanese families were cultivating 665 acres in 1908. Only 3 years later, the community had grown to over 200 people. Our communities often had our own Japanese schools, community halls, and growers associations to establish some protection from growers. My parents were both Japanese farmers in Oregon. When I was born in 1914, my parents and grandparents were part of the Gresham Japanese farm community. Like all Japanese families, our family was able to grow our own crops as tenant farmers. We farmed lands other white farmers were unwilling to work. We grew high-value crops like berries and vegetables to pay rent, and did so with great skill and long hours to make modest money. By 1920, local Japanese farmers in Gresham numbered over 300 and occupied half of the acreage of raspberries, 90% of the strawberries, 40% of the loganberries, and 60% of all the vegetable and truck gardens. Similar Japanese farming communities developed in Hood River, Salem, Vancouver, the Puget Sound, and Yakima Valley in Washington state. They grew berries, apples, pears, and vegetables. Although many states were passing laws that targeted foreign-born Japanese and Chinese farmers from owning farmlands, many communities worked around these laws by buying land through holding companies, friendly white neighbors, or through trusts to U.S.-born children.
As a Chinese immigrant farmer and dairy operator, I embodied the hard work and positivity in face of enormous struggles so common for Northwest Asian American farmers. I arrived in the Northwest in the 1880s when I was only 12 years old. Working as a water boy for railroads at the height of the anti-Chinese riots, I later found work as a vegetable farmer outside of Vancouver. Chinese farmers, like me, worked from before dawn to after sunset growing food and selling it to customers in our carts. Like other Chinese farmers, I was a staple of the community, participating in parades and community events, but was denied citizenship and unable to own the land I worked on. Saving every penny, I sold my vegetable cart and equipment and purchased a very successful dairy business that supplied milk to Vancouver. I broke down community prejudice against other Asian dairy operators in the Northwest. I often had customers return milk to the store when they saw my name on the cap, but that did not discourage me. I was determined to show American people that a Chinese man knows how to produce a clean product that will compare with the best American producers. While I did own the equipment, cows, and machinery, I was unable to own the land because of racist land laws. Eventually, as Vancouver grew, the landowners sold property to build a dog racetrack.
Throughout the early 20th century, Oregon Washington continued to amend its alien land laws. It represented a renewed era of white supremacy. The 1924 Immigration Act ended Japanese immigration outright. Special provisions targeted holding companies for owning land for Japanese and Chinese farmers. Oregon passed a law preventing Asian farmers from leasing land and even operating farm equipment. Other laws attempted to prohibit foreign-born parents from working or even living on lands their U.S. citizen children owned. While some farming families still skirted these laws and maintained their farms, a great many did not. Almost all of the Asian farmers and their U.S. citizen children openly celebrated American culture, dress, language, and the American dream. But in the eyes of an angry state, they were an alien threat. During World War II, President Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, which ordered the removal of 120,000 Japanese Americans from the West Coast to 10 inland concentration camps. Even though as an American citizen, me and my family were forced into an internment camp at Minidoka. We lost all the improvements we had made to the land and the crop that summer. Many of the farmers who took over our land said they made enough on the crops to buy the place. All of the Japanese families were forced from their farms and left what little property we owned behind. In a bitter turn, U.S. officials asked me to recruit other Japanese farmers to grow food for the war effort in American concentration camps, while other white farmers swooped in and bought our old farms. Again, our skills as farmers was recognized, but our rights and autonomy were characterized only by our race. Following the war, a few Japanese farmers like our family were able to get our lands back from friendly white neighbors, but many more never returned to their farms because the white communities threatened us with violence. The U.S. Supreme Court invalidated all the Oregon and Washington alien land laws in the 1950s. After pressure from new Filipino immigrant farmers, the state of Washington officially repealed its alien land laws from the books in the 1960s, but the pain is still felt by some families. Nearly a century of white supremacy and racist land laws held a great many of Asian farmers back. Despite the open hostility, there are still Japanese and Chinese farming families in communities across the Pacific Northwest.
My success as a vegetable farmer and dairy operator helped propel my son Percy Loy into an exciting future in food science and preservation. Percy was founder and owner of Kubla Khan Frozen Foods, continuing a legacy of Asian farmers feeding families across the country. The legacy of farming in the Pacific Northwest is long and complex.
But the delicious fruits and vegetables we enjoy today grow in the same soils that thousands of Asian farmers labored and pioneered techniques to bring food to our tables.
As we enjoy our food, we should honor their lives and determination and never repeat the dark struggles and prejudices they endured.